Today, a new era begins in the United States. In the coming hours, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th US president. It is a remarkable return to power for a politician who has been impeached twice and convicted of felony crimes. Today, Washington, normally a liberal city, is packed with supporters of his MAGA movement who have turned out despite the freezing weather. Now, the ceremony itself has been moved inside to the Capitol building. That is the very place that Trump supporters broke into 4 years ago after he claimed falsely he had won the 2020 election. Well, the handover of power is a Washington event that is steeped in history and ritual. To give you a sense of what is happening right now, Trump and his wife Melania are currently attending a church service at St. John's Church, that's in Lafayette Park, across from the White House. You're looking at the front of it just there. And in a couple of minutes, we're expecting that service to come to an end, although it did start a little behind schedule, so there may be some delays. But we are expecting the Trumps to leave and head to the White House, where they will have tea with the Bidens. Well, let's see now on the programme if we can bring in our guest at the top of this hour. It is Andrew Yarrow. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. He's a historian, a journalist, and he previously was a speechwriter during the Clinton administration. Really good to talk to you today, sir. Thanks very much for making the time.
Thank you, Nadia. It's a pleasure to be here on this very cold day in Washington.
Indeed, and plans have been sort of shifted around as a result of that. But one thing that we understand definitely is going to happen is the slew of executive orders that Donald Trump will sign in the coming hours once the inauguration ceremony is over. Look, we've been briefed that they will set the tone for his presidency. What kinds of things do you think he's going to do?
Well, I think he's made it clear that the executive orders will focus on a couple of areas. Immigration, I think he's going to make some dramatic moves to begin his policies of deporting illegal immigrants. Energy policy is another. He's talked about rolling back many of President Biden's climate change initiatives and to allow offshore oil drilling, oil and gas drilling. And he probably will issue some executive orders pardoning some of the many people convicted of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. And as you'd mentioned, it's certainly ironic that he's holding the ceremony, the swearing-in ceremony, in the rotunda of the Capitol, which was ransacked by his supporters in 2021, 4 years ago.
Look, on the question of those executive orders, another issue is how many of them will actually be able to stick. Because, for example, during the campaign last year, he promised to deport millions of undocumented immigrants. But, legally, logistically, surely that will face a challenge, won't it?
Yes, it certainly will. I think there are clearly a lot of states and cities that have said that they will not support the deportations. They're sanctuary cities. I think that will be very hard. Clearly, groups like the American Civil Liberties Union will challenge some of the orders to deport, but his plans to deport are popular among Americans. I saw a YouGov poll showing at least 55% of Americans support deporting illegal immigrants, and more than, I think it's close to 80% supporting deportation of those who've committed crimes in the US. So certainly of those who've committed crimes, that will be harder to challenge. That will be harder to make legal challenges. So I think we'll see a lot of turmoil at the border in the coming days and weeks.
And look, before we get to those executive orders, which Trump will sign once he becomes president, we, of course, have the inauguration itself. And I wanted to talk to you about that because you are a former speechwriter. And many viewers will remember the sort of rather dark, ominous tone that Trump set in his inauguration speech when he won back in 2017. He talked not only of America first, but of American carnage. Do you think his speechwriters will be using the same kind of language this time around, or will we hear a rather different tone?
It's hard to say. I mean, he's certainly been unpredictable. At the Republican convention this summer, he began his acceptance speech with a much more conciliatory tone, but then moved into the more familiar kind of pugilistic tropes that have characterized his speeches. So I think it will be a mixture. I think he will talk about America coming back, that this will be the greatest era for America. He'll contrast it with the Biden era, which he will certainly disparage. I think it's sad and hard to think of him and Melania having coffee with the Bidens this morning, riding from the White House to the Capitol for the inauguration. Biden will be there. Of course, Trump was not there for Biden's inauguration 4 years ago. And the extent to which he will attack the Biden administration will be interesting to see, but I imagine he will.
And just before we let you go, sir, a thought from you then on the outgoing president, Joe Biden, his legacy. How do you think history will remember the 46th US president?
Well, I mean, there certainly is a lot of negative commentary now about Biden in terms of why he didn't step down earlier, that the Democrats could have had a better chance to defeat Donald Trump in 2024 had he kept his promise or his suggested promise that he would be a one-term president. But I think history will be kind to Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden had a long, long career in Washington, more than 50 years. He came here was elected as a 29-year-old, only took office as a 30-year-old. He's now 82. And I think Biden brought America through the COVID crisis and out of the COVID crisis. The U.S. economy did turn around. It's the strongest economy of the G7 countries today. And I think his environmental policies and the industrial policies, the CHIPS Act will be things that he'll be remembered for. So I think history in the long term will be kind to Joe Biden, even if commentary is not so kind now.
Andrew Yarrow talking to us live from Washington, D.C. as we start our special coverage today. Really good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nadia.
Well, let's stay in D.C. then. Our Washington correspondent, Fraser Jackson, is also with me live on the line. And Fraser, I was just talking there with Andrew Yarrow about the ritual of the handover of power where you are. We've been looking at images today of the Trumps arriving at church, and after church, they're to go to the White House where they will meet Joe Biden. And this is part, isn't it, of a sort of tradition in Washington, and it is something that's happened for generations. Just tell us a bit about what's happening today and why it's so important.
Yeah, it's a tradition which has gone on for decades, centuries, but of course it's a tradition that was interrupted the last time around that this transition of power took place. A lot of the traditions and ceremonies that were awarded to Donald Trump when he took office, and the little things that happened between presidents, for example, didn't take place when Joe Biden took office, and weren't afforded the same things by Donald Trump. Now, I'm thinking mainly here about one very small tradition, which is not an official tradition, but has become something that is something more common to see in the last couple of decades, and that is a letter that the president writes and leaves on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office for his successor. Now, we are told that Donald Trump received a letter from Barack Obama when he took office in 2017 and was so touched by the letter that he tried to get in direct contact with Barack Obama. But by that point, the Obamas were already on a plane to California, and the two never actually managed to directly speak about it. Well, we then know that Donald Trump continued that tradition, having been so touched by what happened to him from Obama, that he then carried that on with Joe Biden and left what Joe Biden described as a very generous letter on the desk of the Resolute desk. But of course, that was pretty much where the friendliness kind of ended. After that, Joe Biden was there on the steps of the Capitol on his own. The transfer pictures that we saw never happened, and something that we're going to see today as well, which is going to be very emblematic and very symbolic as well, is going to be the fact that Joe Biden, as well, along with his wife, Dr. Biden, they're going to accompany the Trumps in the same car from the steps of the White House, from the North Portico, where they will meet just in the minutes before that, and then they will make their way down to the Capitol, where that transfer of power will happen, and then we will see Joe Biden leave the Capitol for what will be his final air mission, the Special Air Mission 46. So he will be then boarding that plane known as Air Force One when he is president, and will also follow in the footsteps of Obama and be flying to California as well. So we are expecting a lot of tradition to be restored here today, something that we didn't see 4 years ago. But of course, Joe Biden is a man of tradition and is a man who has been surrounded by the trappings of Washington for the best part of 5 decades. So it is something that he is keen to bring back to the Oval Office and to the end of his presidency.
And Fraser, look, you're looking rather wrapped up as you talk to us today, because it's extremely cold where you are in Washington, D.C. And that means that in terms of that choreography you were telling us about and the traditions, one big thing is taking place differently that's this year, and that's the location of the inaugural event itself.
Yes, a lot of disappointed Trump supporters that I'm speaking to over the course of the last 24 or so hours. But the grand ceremony, the big images that we see from the inaugurations typically will not be happening this time. This is the first time since 1985 that an inauguration has taken place inside the rotunda of the Capitol. I actually spoke to one of a Democrat, a very prominent Democratic lawmaker on my way to the position this morning, and asked them about what they going to be seeing at the rotunda of the Capitol today, and they said that there's going to be only space for oligarchs and billionaires. So a bit of an idea as to the kind of selective guest list that has actually managed to make their way inside the rotunda. Of course, it is a much smaller venue than the steps of the Capitol itself. So that's a ceremony that we normally see attended by tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people will not be happening this time around. And of course, the first time Donald Trump got inaugurated, the crowd size that gathered at his first inauguration became something of folklore, and something that was spoken about at his very first press conference, his very first press briefing rather, by Sean Spicer, his then press secretary, who said this was the biggest crowd to attend an inauguration. It's become somewhat of a joke line which Donald Trump has been hit with in the years that followed. Well, that will not be happening this time, because all of those tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to attend this will no longer be able to do so. Instead, they will be watching from a watch party inside the Capital One Arena in downtown DC with a capacity of around 20,000 people. And Nadia, if the lines that I saw yesterday just to get into Donald Trump's victory rally are anything to go by, there will be a lot of disappointed people today who are trying to get inside that arena but won't be able to.
Fraser Jackson for us there live in DC. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be speaking to Fraser throughout the day as we keep a very close eye on these historic events in Washington. So, does Donald Trump represent a true threat to American democracy? In the past, he has spoken in glowing terms about authoritarian leaders around the world, and even said he would be, quote, a dictator on day one in office. But what in practice might Trump do? France 24's Monty Francis has been talking to experts on democracy to discuss this moment in American history.
When Donald Trump spoke to a gathering of Christian supporters in late July, he said something that even for Trump seemed so over the top, it left many wondering what exactly he meant.
Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years. You know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Democrats said the comments signalled his plans to be a dictator, while the Trump campaign claimed he was just talking about uniting the country. Former Republican Representative Liz Cheney, who chaired the January 6th committee in Congress, has been warning for months that Trump would refuse to leave office after his term expires in 4 years' time.
Our nation can survive and recover from policy mistakes. We cannot recover from a president willing to torch the Constitution.
Trump is the first US president to refuse to accept the outcome of an election, to falsely insist the 2020 race was stolen from him, and to encourage his followers to contest the results, as they did, violently, on January the 6th. Trump also has an affinity for authoritarian leaders and has said he would be a dictator on just the first day when re-elected. Experts say there are numerous warning signs that American democracy is in danger.
Because the Republican Party is now an autocratic party that has election denial and corruption and lying about elections baked into it.
But experts say the threat to democracy is broader than just Trump and point to a recent ruling from the US Supreme Court as a major obstacle. The justices have effectively shielded a president from criminal prosecution for official acts, which, as one dissenting justice pointed out, could even include executing one's political opponents.
The Supreme Court's decision on immunity is an extraordinarily broad and sweeping one, and really elevates the president to a kind of king figure, which is clearly not something that the framers would have wanted, having just defeated a king.
Experts also say the court has left the door open for a president to abuse his power. Trump, who is the first former president to be a convicted felon, has also suggested that he would use the FBI and Justice Department to indict his political enemies. Trump has dismissed all such concern, claiming it's the Democrats who are the real threat, and that he's the one who actually took a bullet for democracy when someone tried to assassinate him at a campaign rally.
Now, immigration was a cornerstone issue for Trump during his re-election campaign last year. 8 years ago, his promise was to build a wall and impose a Muslim ban. Now he wants to establish the largest mass deportation program in the country's history. As a result, many immigrants who've lived in the United States for years fear for their future, as Delano D'Souza now reports.
Cracking down on illegal immigration was one of Donald Trump's main campaign promises. And as he retakes power in Washington, he's pledging to do just that.
Are you going to see executive orders that are going to make you extremely happy? Lots of them. The invasion of our borders will have come to a halt, and all the illegal border trespassers will in some form or another be on their way back home.
Donald Trump says he wants to carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. He says he's ready to use the U.S. National Guard and federal troops to achieve this goal. Migrants who entered the country illegally but have been living in the United States for decades are now worried about what comes next.
Unfortunately, there are many like me who have been here more than 30 or 40 years. They bought homes here. They own businesses here and still don't have papers.
I am a bit afraid because I think of my kids. If one day I'm picked up by ICE, how will they find out? Who's going to pick them up from school? I believe it would be traumatic for my children.
Trump's mass deportation operation is likely to face legal challenges and resistance from Democrats in Congress. The move has even been slammed by Pope Francis, who's labeled it a disgrace.
Now, on climate and environmental matters, the outlook does appear fairly bleak for this incoming Trump presidency. During his first term in office, Trump rolled back more than 100 environmental rules governing clean air, water, wildlife and toxic chemicals. Well, to take a look at what he's likely to do during his second term in office, France 24's Charlie James is with me now. And Charlie, look, what has Trump said, first of all, he plans to do when it comes to the environment?
So, Nadia, Trump calls climate change a big hoax. So It's not really a surprise. He's not expected to be a steward of the environment during his presidency. He says that the economy needs to take priority over the environment. So he plans to roll back climate regulations and push forward fossil fuel production. Now, this is something he's been promising throughout the campaign, and that he has said as recently as yesterday at his pre-inaugural dinner. Have a listen.
We will quickly defeat the inflation crisis and unlock the liquid gold. You know what liquid gold is? We have more than anybody under our feet. In other words, we will drill, baby, drill, and get those prices down, and everything else is going to follow energy.
Drill, baby, drill. It's one of his many slogans, and Trump says that he wants to create new opportunities for production by dismantling what he sees as unnecessary and burdensome regulation related to climate. So he's promising to get rid of a lot of the regulations that President Biden put in place, including ones that were aimed at slashing carbon dioxide, methane, and other emissions from cars, power plants, and other industrial sources. And he says he's going to get started on this immediately through executive orders. And he's planning to start that, he says, today. Now, executive orders are directives from the sitting president that become law, and they overturn any previous executive orders from other presidents. So he's essentially just undoing everything that President Biden put in place that worked towards U.S. climate goals. So it's interesting, Nadia, that during the campaign, Trump also called himself an environmentalist. He said, we want really clean air, we want really clean water. But this is in direct conflict with promising to increase the amount of fossil fuel production in the U.S.
And Charlie, we're talking obviously because it is inauguration day today, and just to let our viewers know what is happening in the timeline, as Charlie was just speaking there, we saw the Trumps, Donald Trump and his wife Melania, leaving St. John's Church there, not far from the White House. They are now to drive to the White House, where they will be greeted there by the Bidens. And while we wait for those images for them to arrive, let's go back to Charlie, who's still with me, talking about environmental issues. And so, look, Charlie, what else did Donald Trump do during that first term that could give us some more clues as to his plans now?
So Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords during his first term after calling it a bad deal for the U.S., bad for the economy. And in the eyes of some in the world, this really hurt the U.S.'s reputation. It made it hard for other countries to be sure that they could trust the U.S. to follow through on its commitments when it comes to the climate. So Biden did reverse that action when he came in and he rejoined the accord. So now the question is President Trump going to withdraw again when he takes power? He could withdraw. The other option could be that he just ignores the requirements of the agreement. Either way, the U.S., who is the second biggest emitter in the world, is set to once again stop being a global leader on climate. And if the U.S. withdraws or ignores the Paris Accords, it could give other countries that are maybe struggling to hit their own markers permission to withdraw or ignore the accords themselves.
And look, Charlie, finally, who's Trump putting in his cabinet who's going to help him enact his vision on climate?
Right. So the main governmental body in the U.S. that protects the environment is the EPA. It's called the Environmental Protection Agency. Trump's nominee to run the EPA is Lee Zeldin. He is a former New York congressman. He's a Trump loyalist, and he has a resume that you could say is light on environmental experience. During his confirmation hearing last week, Zeldin did acknowledge that climate change is real, which breaks from Donald Trump, who, like I said, calls climate change a hoax. But we also heard from Zeldin that he is very much on board with Trump's climate agenda. Have a listen.
It is simple but essential: to protect human health and the environment. We must do everything in our power to harness the greatness of American innovation with the greatness of American conservation and environmental stewardship. We must ensure we are protecting the environment while also protecting our economy.
While also protecting the economy. There you go. We hear again this balancing of environmental health with economic health, and it very much looks like the economy is going to win out on the scales there. Zeldin is likely to scrap climate standards for power plants, the oil industry, and cars. And Trump has also indicated that he wants to make big cuts to the staffing numbers at the EPA.
Charlie James, thank you very much indeed. And look, speaking of the economy, that was a big, if not the big issue on American voters' minds when they went to the polls back in November. Our reporters have been to meet one family to get a better sense of why purchasing power mattered so much back in November.
I mean, you might as well just buy some land with the cost of going out to eat.
Elizabeth and I have come to meet Lily, a mum of 3. We're going to do a spot of shopping and see what her purchasing power is like today.
The reason why I shop here is actually everything's pretty cheap here. Probably the most expensive products would be like an organic meat or eggs. It doesn't seem bad to me. It seems like you would get one good meal out of it. I'm sorry. I don't think that's bad. I try to avoid the convenience food, because the convenience food really adds up, because you're paying for them to pre-make it, and you're paying for that convenience.
Un pain au chocolat.
How do you say? Pain au chocolat. Le pain au chocolat français.
Oh, even with that little Arc de Triomphe.
Oh!
It's legit.
I do like to shop in bulk, but I also like to limit my shopping trips and just buy what I need, you know?
So how much did you say that your shopping bills had increased by?
$300 a month, $350 over the last 4 years.
To overcome the problem, the family has had to pick up extra work.
So my husband has 2 jobs. My neighbors on both sides are working multiple jobs. Really, I feel like other things have become so much more expensive. The price of gas has gone up.
Do you think Donald Trump is going to fix the problem?
It's a complicated question. You know, there were a lot of things he promised in 2020 that he never did.
Even Donald Trump has admitted that his campaign promise to lower grocery prices will be very hard to achieve.
My computer. Well, let's show you the very latest images coming out of Washington on this historic inauguration day. Those are the live pictures we have from the front of the White House. This because the motorcade, you see it there, Donald Trump's motorcade with Melania Trump, has now departed from St. John's Church, and it is heading to the White House. That's where the incoming and outgoing president are to have a brief cup of tea or coffee before they head to the Capitol building for the inauguration ceremony itself. We'll keep a very close eye on those images for you and bring you more from the United States as soon as we have it.